Now that we've found out how to use number lines to find absolute value, we're going to practice using Desmos, our calculator for Virginia, to calculate absolute value and also to compare different absolute values of numbers. So I need everyone to pull up a Desmos calculator, either on the same device that you're using in a different window, or you can use a different device. Regardless, you need to pull up this calculator so that we can try these problems together. So if you need a moment, you need to pause the video, do that so that you can pull up your calculator. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start out with our first problem. Our first problem says we're trying to figure out if the absolute value of -7 is equal to +7. So we're going to go to our calculator, and on our calculator down here, we have the absolute value key. So I want you to locate that key on your calculator. And now that you've found it, we're going to go ahead and try some problems with that key. So I'm going to come over here. And we can go ahead and get started. So I'm just going to type in, I'm going to use that key, and I'm going to put in -7. And I want to find out the value of the absolute value of -7. If I press enter, I see that it's 7. So you can confirm here with your Desmos calculator that that is a true statement. So this would be true. And I would expect that you would know that the absolute value of -7 should be a positive value. It's the distance from 0, so it's equal to 7, but you can confirm that using your calculator. All right, let's look at a few more problems. Okay, the next one we're going to look at is we're going to try to find out if -5 is equal to the absolute value of 5. So for this one, I'm going to show you -5 is -5. It's not going to change. -5 is this. And I'm going to see if that's equal to the absolute value of +5. So again, I'm going to use my calculator. I'm going to press my absolute value key. And I'm going to put in 5 this time. And this tells me that the absolute value of 5 is actually equal to +5. So I'm going to record that. The absolute value of 5 is actually equal to +5. So if I'm determining whether this is a true statement or not, I can see that -5 is not equal to +5. So this is actually going to be a false statement. So even though the absolute value sign is on the right, I can still put that into my calculator, evaluate it, figure out the answer to compare it to the other side of the statement. All right, let's try another one. Okay, this time we have a decimal and a fraction. So this is where Desmos is especially helpful because we can compare decimals and fractions for this particular concept using a calculator. Now again, I know that 1.5 is already simplified. And I'm going to try to figure out if 1.5 is equal to the absolute value of -1 1/2. Now Desmos can be a little trickier when you're putting in mixed numbers like this. So I'm going to show you the best strategy, especially on a touchscreen device, that you can use to figure out this answer. So we're going to go over to our Desmos calculator. And this time, I am going to put in my absolute value sign. I'm going to put the fraction or the negative value first, and then I'm going to press the fraction key. I'm going to put in the 1/2, and then I'm going to click before I'm going to get my cursor to go between the negative and the 1/2 sign, and I'm going to put in 1. Okay. So this tells me that the absolute value of -1 1/2 is equal to 1.5. So we have that equivalent. So we're going to see if that is the same as our statement. So this is equal to 1.5. And so that's true. They're equivalent. So this is going to be a true statement. And again, even though the absolute value sign is on the right, we can put that into our calculator to see if it's equivalent to the statement on the left. Let's try another example. We have another fraction. So this time, get rid of the ink here. This time we have the absolute value of negative 2/3 is equal to negative 2/3. So this time we have it on the left. And so we're trying to figure out this answer. So I'm going to go to my Desmos calculator, and I'm going to click my absolute value sign, and I'm going to put in my fraction. Actually, I'm going to put in my negative sign, then my fraction. I'm going to put the 2 for my numerator, the 3 for my denominator, and I'm going to get equal. All right, and you might say at this point, well, it doesn't really tell us if it's equivalent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write that. It says that the absolute value of negative 2/3 is equal to 0 6/10 repeating. So I'm just going to record that. 0 6/10 repeating. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this fraction to a decimal and see if I get the same thing. So I'm going to clear out my calculator. I'm going to put in negative, and then I have a 2 on the top. Click on the box, put a 3 on the bottom, and then you'll notice that I do have a similar number right here, but it's a negative. Oh, so this is a negative 0 6/10 repeating. They may have the same absolute value, but they are not the same value. So these are not the same. So I can determine that this is false. And it's false because we have a negative number being compared to a positive number. And again, they are similar in that they have the same absolute value, but they're not the actual same number. So let's look at one more problem. So now we have a decimal and a fraction again. And if you notice this time, we have a negative and a negative. So it's the opposite. When you see a negative, you can think of that as negative or opposite of something else. On the left side of the statement, we have negative 2.4, which we've already simplified, negative 4/10, negative 2 4/10. So I'm going to use my Desmos calculator to calculate the value of this. I'm going to type it in just like I have it. I'm going to go to my Desmos. I'm going to put in a negative, just like I have here. And then I'm going to use my absolute value sign. Oops. I'm going to put in my negative, absolute value sign, and I'm going to put in negative. I'm going to do my fraction first, just like before, 2/5. And then I have to click in between. You see how I clicked in between the negative and the fraction, and I'm going to put in my 2. If you try to put in the fraction after the whole number, it's very difficult. But if you put in your fraction first, and then you put your cursor back to the left, you can put in your whole number. So we'll go ahead and click enter. We have our answer. And so we're going to verify. We're going to look at what we typed in to make sure it's correct. And we were trying to type in this. Negative 2 2/5, or the opposite of the absolute value of negative 2 2/5. That's what we put in here. And we found that to be, when we convert it to a decimal, it's right here. So we're going to list that below our absolute value problem. And it says from the calculator, it's negative 2 4/10. So if we're comparing the two values, negative 2 4/10 is equivalent to negative 2 4/10, which is what we get when we evaluate the opposite of the absolute value of 2 2/5. So this statement is a true statement. On the next slide, you're going to have some of these problems that you're going to try. So you are going to be grouping statements that are true and those that are false. And I want you to use your Desmos calculator when you're doing that. Okay, that's it for our tutorial on using Desmos to find absolute value.